For 40 years I drove a school bus. 40 years, same district, mostly the same route. You see a lot in that time. You see kids grow up. You see the town change. Roads get paved. New houses go up where there used to be nothing but fields. But the route stays the same. You come to know it like the lines on your own hand. You know every pothole, every crack in the pavement, every oak tree that leans just a little too far over the road. You learn the rhythm of it. 6:15 a.m. start the engine. 6:28, first pickup at the Miller farm. 6:34, the Henderson twins. And on and on. It's a life of routine. And in a routine, you find safety, you find sanity. My bus was old number 5, a big, yellow International from the late 60s. It wasn't fast, it wasn't comfortable, but it was reliable. It had quirks, sure. The heater only worked if you kicked it just right, and the big door hissed like a snake when it opened. But it was my office, my little kingdom on wheels, and I took pride in my work. In 40 years, I was never late. Not once. Through snow, through thunderstorms, through whatever the world threw at me. But there's one kind of weather, one kind that changes things. The kind that can make a road you've driven 1,000 times feel like a foreign country. I'm talking about the fog. Not the nice, pretty mist you see sometimes in the morning. I'm talking about the real stuff. The tool fog we get out here. It's a living thing. It rolls in overnight and swallows the world whole. You can't see 10 feet in front of the bumper. It muffles sound. It steals the color from everything, leaving the world a charcoal drawing of itself. Driving in that, well, that's when you rely on instinct. On instinct. On the memory of the road that lives in your bones. The first time it happened must have been the fall of '75. It was a Monday morning, and the fog was the thickest I'd ever seen. I was on the old country section of my route, Cloverdale Road. I'd done my first few pickups, the bus filled with the quiet, sleepy chatter of farm kids. I came to the turn onto Millstream Lane, a sharp right-hander that I always took at a crawl. I made the turn, just like always. But the feel was wrong. The rumble of the tires changed. That smooth, worn asphalt sound was gone, replaced by the crunch of loose gravel. Now, my first thought was road work. The county was always patching things up. I figured they'd laid down some gravel before paving, and I just hadn't heard about it. I kept going, slower now, peering into the gray soup ahead. But the gravel gave way to dirt. A packed earth road, slick with morning dew. The bus groaned and fishtailed a little. That's when the first real knot of unease tightened in my gut. There was no road work scheduled, and there was no dirt road on this part of the route. I knew that for a fact. I'd been driving it for 10 years. I should have stopped. I should have tried to back her up. But in that fog, you get disoriented. You convince yourself you're mistaken, that your memory's playing tricks. The safest thing, you think, is to just keep moving forward, slow and steady. The road will have to come out somewhere, right? The dirt track was narrow, lined with the dark, skeletal shapes of old cypress trees. It felt ancient, wrong. And then, up ahead, I saw a shape. A small, still figure standing by a fence post at the side of the road. It was a kid, just standing there, waiting. There was no house, no driveway, not even a mailbox. Just a stretch of rotted fence and this little child. My schedule, my route, it all went out the window. My only thought was, what on earth is a kid doing out here? I pulled old number 5 to a stop, the brakes squealing in the silence. I swung the lever, and the door hissed open, letting in a swirl of cold, damp air. The child got on without a word. It was a boy, couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. He was wearing a thin, dark wool coat, the kind you'd see in old black and white pictures, and worn leather boots. Not nearly enough for the damp chill of that morning. His face was pale, not just a little pale, but a translucent, bloodless white, like fine china. His hair was dark and neatly combed. He just looked at me with these big, dark eyes that didn't seem to be looking at me, but through me at something far away. He didn't say hello. He didn't pay a fare. He just walked right past me, his steps making no sound on the rubber floor, and sat in the first seat. Right behind me on the right, I closed the door. "Mornin'," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Bit of a pee, super out there, huh?" He didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead out the huge front window into the fog. I remember the cold. The bus's heater was chugging along, but a sudden, piercing chill filled the cab. It was like someone had opened a freezer door. It radiated out from him, a deep, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The other kids on the bus, who had been whispering and laughing, all went silent. Every one of them. The only sound was the low rumble of the engine. I put the bus in gear and started forward again, my hands slick with sweat on the big steering wheel. "Where are you headed, son?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud. "What's your stop?" Silence. I drove on. The dirt road seemed to stretch on for miles, though it couldn't have been more than 1 or 2. It felt like driving through a tunnel of gray. Finally, up ahead, another shape resolved out of the fog. A house. Or what was left of one. It was a derelict old farmhouse, the kind that had been abandoned for a generation. The roof was sagging, the porch had collapsed in on itself, and the windows were dark, empty eyes. No one had lived there for 50 years. I knew the place. It was the old Hatcher place. It was set way back in the fields, with no road leading to it. Or, there shouldn't have been a road. As I pulled up, the boy stood up. Just like that. He walked to the front and stood there, waiting. I opened the door. The cold air rushed out, as if it had been trapped inside with him. He stepped off the bus, again without a sound, and started walking toward that ruined house. A small, lonely figure quickly being swallowed by the fog. He didn't look back. I watched until he was gone. Then I closed the door, took a shaky breath, and drove away. Not 50 yards past the house, the dirt road curved, and my tires were suddenly back on the familiar, solid asphalt of Millstream Lane. Just like that. It was like the dirt road, the child, the stop. None of it had ever been there. I looked in my rearview mirror. The turn I'd come from looked exactly as it always had. The rest of the morning was quiet. None of the kids spoke a word until we were pulling into the schoolyard. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it. A trick of the fog, a waking dream. But when I cleaned out the bus that afternoon, the seat where the boy had sat was still cold. Not just cool, ice, cold, like a slab of marble in winter. It happened again. Maybe 3 or 4 times a year, always on the mornings with the worst fog. I started to dread them. I'd feel the dampness in the air when I woke up and a cold knot would form in my stomach. The turn onto Millstream would come, and I'd hold my breath. Most times it was fine, but sometimes the road would change, and I knew he'd be there, waiting. I never spoke to him again, and he never spoke to me. It became a silent, terrifying routine. He'd get on, the bus would turn to ice, and he'd get off at the ruined house. I thought I was going crazy. I mean, who could I tell? Sorry. Boss. But sometimes my bus drives down a ghost road to pick up a ghost kid. They'd have me in a straitjacket, so I kept it to myself. It was my burden. My secret passenger. After about 5 years of this, I couldn't take it anymore. On a bright, clear Saturday afternoon, I drove my own car out to Cloverdale Road. I wanted to prove to myself I was sane. I found the turn onto Millstream Lane. It was just as it should be. A paved road, no dirt track in sight. I pulled over and got out. I could see the old Hatcher place, way out across a wide, overgrown field of weeds and wildflowers. There was no road to it. There was no sign there had ever been a road. It was just a lonely ruin in the middle of nowhere. That's when I went to the county records office. I spent a whole afternoon smelling of dust and old paper, looking through property deeds and old newspapers, and I found it. The Hatcher family, they'd owned that land since the turn of the century. They had one child, a boy named Thomas. In the winter of 1928, the county had started its first ever school bus service. Thomas, who was 7, was so excited. His mother wrote about it in a letter I found reprinted in the local paper's historical section. On the first day of the new route, a cold, foggy morning, Thomas went out to wait at the end of their farm lane. But the bus was delayed. He waited for over an hour in the damp cold. He caught pneumonia. A week later, he was dead. He never got to ride the school bus. And that's when I finally understood. I wasn't going crazy, and it wasn't a monster I was picking up. It was a memory, an echo, a sadness so deep it had stained the land itself. The fog you see, I think the fog acts like a screen, and on the right day the past can project itself onto it. And my bus, old number 5, rumbling down that road, I think it was just close enough to the bus he was waiting for. I wasn't his driver. I was just the man who happened to be there when his ghost finished its long, lonely wait. I was his ferryman, finishing a journey that began 50 years before I was even born. The last time I saw him was the year before I retired. It was the same as all the others. The fog, the dirt road, the silent, pale boy. He got off at the house and vanished into the mist. But that time, it felt different. It felt final. It never happened again. I've lived my whole life as a practical man. I believe in what I can see and touch. But I also believe that there are thin places in this world, places where the past isn't quite gone, and it can reach out and touch you. I drove a school bus for 40 years. I carried thousands of living, breathing children safely to and from school. But the one passenger I will remember until my dying day is the one who wasn't really there at all. You're probably thinking that the creepy stuff, the real horror, only happens in old, forgotten places. In dusty farmhouses with ghost children or out on lonely roads shrouded in fog. I get it. That's the kind of story that feels right, the kind that has rules. But some things don't have rules. Some things are new, or at least, they're not old in the same way. They're not haunted by memories from the 1920s. They're haunted by last Tuesday. They're soaked in the everyday, casual cruelty of a bunch of teenagers. I don't have a story about a ghost. I have a story about a machine. And I'm not talking to a grandson 50 years from now. I'm writing this down tonight because I have to get on this thing again tomorrow morning, and I'm terrified. My story is about bus 734. There's nothing special about it. It's not some ancient, rusted-out relic. It's just one of those Thomas Safety liner buses from the early 2000s. You've seen a million of them. The seats are covered in that weird, blue vinyl that's always either freezing cold or sticky, and every single one has been carved up with compass points and declarations of love. It smells like a combination of diesel fumes, Axe body spray, and disappointment. For 2 years, it's been my ride to and from Northwood High. It's not a place. It's just a container that moves you from one part of your life you don't like to another. I'm an observer. I sit 3 rows from the back, on the right. Always. It's the perfect vantage point. I put my headphones on, but I keep the volume low enough to hear everything. You learn a lot about people by watching them when they think no one is. You see the social hierarchy of high school play out in miniature. The jocks and cheerleaders own the back 5 rows, the freshmen huddle in the front, and the rest of us fill in the liminal spaces in between. Our driver is a guy named Mr. Henderson, a man whose entire personality seems to be a deep, weary sigh. I started this journal because the malfunctions started getting weird, too specific, too coincidental. At first, I brushed it off, like everyone else. It's an old bus, things break. But then I started to see the pattern. It began with the stop sign, not the one in the road, but the mechanical one hinged to the side of the bus. The one that swings out with flashing red lights when we stop to let kids on or off. It was a Tuesday in April. We were on the highway, and this guy in a beat-up red pickup was tailgating us something fierce. He was laying on the horn, flashing his lights, being a real jerk. You could feel the collective annoyance on the bus. Mr. Henderson was getting flustered, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. We finally pulled off onto a side road for a stop. The bus slowed, the door hissed open, and the stop sign swung out, just like it's supposed to. A couple of kids got off. The door closed, and the stop sign stayed out. Mr. Henderson flicked the switch a few times. Nothing. He sighed, muttering about faulty wiring. Meanwhile, the guy in the pickup saw his chance. He gunned his engine, swerving into the oncoming lane to pass us. It was illegal and dangerous, but he was committed. Just as the nose of his truck was passing Mr. Henderson's window, the stop sign did something I've never seen a piece of machinery do. It didn't retract. It snapped back. It moved with a speed and violence that wasn't mechanical. It was predatory. The heavy, metal sign whipped back and caught the corner of the pickup's windshield with a sickening crunch. The truck swerved wildly, careened off the road, and plowed into a muddy ditch. Everyone on the bus jumped at the sound. Mr. Henderson slammed on the brakes, thinking he'd been hit. But I was the only one on that side of the bus who had a clear view. I saw it. The timing, the precision. It wasn't a malfunction. It was an attack. It was a punishment. I wrote it down that night, feeling a cold pit in my stomach. It was the first entry in what I started calling the Bus Phase 734 Anomaly Log. The second major incident happened a month later. It involved Kyle, the king of the back of the bus tyrants. Kyle's a classic bully, big, loud, and he gets his kicks by tormenting kids smaller than him. His target that day was a freshman named Sam, a quiet kid who just wanted to be invisible. Kyle and his friends had Sam cornered at the very back, knocking his books out of his hands, laughing as he scrambled to pick them up off the dirty floor. I hate guys like Kyle, but you learn not to intervene. It only makes you the next target. We were on Old Creek Road, which is notoriously bumpy. We were all bouncing around. The emergency exit door at the very back of the bus has always been a little loose. It rattles and groans. As Kyle was leaning back against it, shoving Sam into the opposite seat, I heard a sound. It was a sharp, clean click. It was not the sound of a rattle. It was the sound of a latch being professionally and deliberately disengaged. The emergency door flew open a few inches with the momentum of the bus. It wasn't enough to spill anyone out, but it was enough to expose a terrifying slice of the road rushing by at 40 miles per hour. The wind howled into the bus. Kyle, who had been leaning against it a second before, screamed. A real, high-pitched scream. He practically threw himself over the seat to get away from it, his face ghost white. Mr. Henderson pulled over, his face purple with rage. He stormed to the back, yelling about how he was going to have everyone suspended for tampering with emergency equipment. But I was watching the whole time. No one was touching the big red handle. No one was anywhere near the latch. The bus did it. I'm certain of it. It waited until the perfect moment when the biggest bully was at his most vulnerable. And it showed him just how easily he could be erased. It was another act of twisted, mechanical justice. That's when my theory started to form. What if the bus is aware? Not haunted, not possessed by a demon, nothing that dramatic. But what if, after years and years of absorbing the ambient emotional energy of this daily rote, the anger, the anxiety, the petty cruelties, the silent desperation, it just woke up? What if it developed a personality? A crude, mechanical consciousness with a very simple, very strict moral code. It doesn't like aggressive drivers. It doesn't like bullies. It's like a grumpy, territorial old animal, and we're all just mice scurrying around in its belly every day. I started watching for smaller things, and I saw them everywhere. The heaters on the left side of the bus, where Kyle and his friends sat, would sometimes blast on full, even on hot days, until they were red, faced, and sweating. The overhead lights above a known cheater would flicker and buzz whenever he tried to copy someone's homework. The stop request cord would sometimes refuse to work for kids who were being particularly loud and obnoxious, making them miss their stop. Each incident was small enough to be deniable: a faulty thermostat, old wiring, a sticky cord. But when you see it all together, a pattern emerges. The bus is sentient, and it is judging us. The real horror of it isn't a sudden attack. It's the slow, building dread of realizing you are trapped inside a living, thinking machine that has its own agenda, and you don't know all the rules. The daily commute has become a psychological game. Don't be too loud. Don't be too aggressive. Don't be cruel. Because the bus is watching, and its punishments are swift and dispassionate. It's not about good versus evil. It's about order. It's order. I thought as long as I was quiet, as long as I just observed, I'd be safe. I wasn't a bully. I wasn't a jock. I was just part of the scenery. I was wrong. It happened yesterday. I dropped my phone, and it skidded under the seat in front of me. I sighed and got on my hands and knees to retrieve it. As I reached under the dark, dusty space, my fingers brushed against the metal support frame of the seat. But it wasn't just cold metal. There was something else there. A patch of something sticky and weirdly warm. It wasn't old gum. It had a texture, an organic, rubbery texture. Almost like a film of living tissue. I froze. And in that moment of discovery, the bus hit a pothole. Except, I know this part of the route. There is no pothole there. It was a violent, unnatural lurch. A single, brutal jolt that felt completely manufactured. The seat in front of me slammed down with the force of the jolt, and the metal bar on its back came down hard on my outstretched hand. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up my arm. I screamed and yanked my hand back. It wasn't a bone-crushing injury, but it was immediate and vicious. A clear, unmistakable message. Stop looking. Stop digging. I know you know. So now I'm sitting here, writing this with my left hand, because my right is a swollen, bruised mess. The dread I feel is a new kind of dread. It's not about the bus punishing bullies anymore. It punished me. It knows I've been watching. It knows I've been documenting. I broke one of its rules. I saw the man behind the curtain. Or in this case, the strange, living film under the seat. I am no longer an invisible observer. I am a threat. I have to get on bus at 7:34 in the morning. I have to sit there, inside of it, and pretend I don't know its secret. But it knows I know, and I have no idea what it's going to do to me next. Of all the files in all the boxes I've packed away from my 30 years on the force, there's only one I keep in my study. It's not the most gruesome case, not by a long shot. There are no crime scene photos that would make a rookie lose his lunch. There's no complex web of evidence, no high-speed chases, no dramatic courtroom confession. In fact, on paper, it looks like nothing more than a bizarre footnote. Unlawful detention, maybe some reckless endangerment charges. The DA had a hell of a time figuring out what to even call it. But that file, that one's different. It's the one that taught me that the deepest, most genuine evil isn't always loud and violent. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it hums a children's tune. We called him the Singing Man, but his real name was Arthur Penwright. You see, in my line of work, you categorize things. You have to, or you'll go mad. You have crimes of passion, crimes of greed, crimes of desperation. You can understand the mechanics of them, even if you can't condone the act. A man kills his wife's lover in a jealous rage. It's horrific, but it follows a twisted kind of logic. A junkie robs a liquor store for drug money. It's tragic, but you see the cause and effect. These are monsters, yes, but they are monsters with blueprints. You can trace their wiring. Arthur Penwright had no blueprints. He was a gaping void in a person's suit. The day it happened was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in October. The sky was that crisp, brilliant blue you only get in the fall, and the leaves were just starting to turn. School let out at 3, and a fleet of yellow buses fanned out across the county, carrying their noisy, precious cargo home. Bus 27 was on the Elm Street Road, mostly kids from Westbrook Elementary. First to third graders, mostly, little ones. Their regular driver, a kindly woman named Doris, was out with the flu. So the district sent a substitute, Arthur Penwright. No one thought twice about him. His paperwork was clean. He'd subbed a few times before, no incidents. He was a gray, forgettable man in his late 40s. Thinning hair, glasses that always seemed a little smudged, a nondescript brown jacket. He was the kind of man you could see a dozen times a day and never once register his face. He was background noise. That was his camouflage. The first call came in around 4:15. A frantic mother. Her son's bus, number 27, was over an hour late. That's not unheard of. A flat tire, a fender bender traffic. The dispatcher told her to hold tight and tried to radio the driver. Silence. He tried again. More silence. That's when the first little prickle of unease started at the station. By 4:45, a dozen more parents had called, and that prickle had become a cold knot in our stomachs. We put out an APB, a missing school bus. It sounds like the setup to a joke. It wasn't. A patrol car spotted it an hour later, 20 miles west of town, heading deeper into the rural county roads, where the farmhouses get sparse and the cell service dies. It wasn't speeding or driving erratically. It was just going, away from where it was supposed to be. When the officer tried to pull him over, Penwright didn't even acknowledge the lights or the siren. He just kept driving, maintaining a steady 45 miles per hour, a big yellow box full of children sailing calmly into nowhere. The real story, the part that keeps me up at night, we had to piece together later from the kids. They were our only witnesses, and trying to get a coherent narrative from 27 terrified 7-year-olds is like trying to reconstruct a vase from dust. But patterns emerged. Little shards of the same horrifying memory. It started, they said, with a song. Just after he'd cleared the last of the suburban streets, Arthur Penwright pulled the bus over to the side of the road. He turned around in his seat, and he gave them a smile. The kids said it was a big smile, but it didn't touch his eyes. His eyes were like two little black stones. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "We're going to play a game. The game is called The Song That Never Ends. And the first rule is, we all have to sing. If you sing, we keep moving. If you stop singing, the bus stops, and we don't want to be late getting home, do we?" So they started singing, "Row, row, row your boat." A simple, harmless tune. At first, it was fun, a silly game with the substitute driver. They sang it once, twice, a dozen times, but Penwright never told them to stop. The minutes bled into a half hour, then an hour. Their little voices grew hoarse. The fun evaporated, replaced by a creeping dread. A few kids started to cry. "No crying," Penwright said, his voice still soft, but with an edge to it now, his eyes checking them in the giant rearview mirror. "That's the second rule. No crying. Crying is not singing. If you cry, you're not playing the game correctly." The other kids, desperate to keep the bus moving, to get home, would shush the crying ones. "You have to sing," they'd plead. He'd turned them into their own little jailers. He didn't have to raise his voice. He'd built the cage and given them the keys. Then came the third rule, the one that I find the most chilling. "You must smile while you sing," he announced. "This is a happy song. We have to look happy when we sing it. I want to see your smiles in the mirror." Think about that for a moment. Imagine being 7 years old. You're lost. You're scared. You miss your mom. Your throat is raw from singing the same 4 lines over and over again for what feels like an eternity. And now, you have to force a smile onto your face. You have to perform happiness in the middle of your own private nightmare. The sheer psychological violence of that, it's breathtaking. To force a child to wear a mask of joy over their terror is a kind of soul theft. He had other rules too. They came randomly, nonsensically. Rule number 4, no one looks out the windows on the right side of the bus. There's nothing to see there. The interesting things are all on the left. Of course, this just made them terrified of what might be on the right. Their little imaginations, already in overdrive, conjured up monsters, ghosts, anything to fill the void of his command. He was curating their fear, giving it shape and direction. Rule number 5, the color game. He'd call out a color. "Blue!" And every child wearing blue had to stand up, turn around, and face the back of the bus while they sang. Then red, then green. It was arbitrary. It was about obedience for its own sake. It was a demonstration of his absolute, whimsical control. He was the god of this little yellow universe, and his commandments were meaningless, which made them all the more terrifying. There was no logic to appeal to, no reason to grasp. There was only the rule, the song, and the smile. The sun began to set, painting the inside of the bus in long, orange, distorted shadows. The world outside the windows became a dark, unfamiliar blur of trees and empty fields. For those kids, the world they knew had ceased to exist. Their reality had shrunk to the humming engine, the vinyl seats, the smell of exhaust, and the endless, looping melody of row, row, row your boat. A nursery rhyme twisted into an instrument of torture. When we finally cornered the bus on a dead-end logging road, the fuel tank had run dry. He didn't try to run. He didn't make any demands. When the SWAT team swarmed the bus, they found him just sitting in the driver's seat, humming to himself, a faint, placid smile on his face. The bus was silent, except for the sound of sniffling. The kids were huddled in their seats, pale and exhausted. Some were asleep. Some just stared, their eyes wide and empty. When the doors opened and they saw the uniforms, the relief was so total, so overwhelming, that it was like a dam breaking. The interview with Arthur Penwright was the most unsettling hour of my life. I've interrogated murderers who've looked me in the eye and described their crimes in loving detail. I've sat across from sociopaths who tried to play mind games with me. This was different. There was nothing there. I asked him why he did it. He just blinked at me from behind his smudged glasses. "They needed to learn," he said. "Learn what, Arthur? What did they need to learn?" "The rules," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Life has rules. You have to sing your song. You have to smile. You have to do what you're told. It's not so hard." There was no ransom note, no political agenda, no deranged manifesto. He hadn't harmed a hair on any of their heads, not physically. He didn't seem to grasp that he'd done anything wrong. In his mind, he was a teacher, giving a lesson. He spoke of the children with a strange, detached fondness, as if they were subjects in an experiment to see what it takes to strip away a person's will and replace it with a song. And that's the real horror of the singing man. It's not about what he did, but about what he represented. He showed us how thin the veil of civilization is, how a perfectly normal Tuesday can be hijacked by a quiet man who decides to change the rules of reality. He wasn't a monster who lurked in the shadows. He was the monster who filled out a W-2, who bought milk at the grocery store, who held the door open for you. He was a walking, breathing testament to the fact that the most terrifying chaos isn't the one that comes with explosions and sirens, but the one that comes with a soft voice and an unbreakable, nonsensical rule. The kids, they were never the same. There were no scars to show, no wounds to bandage. Their injuries were invisible, deep in the wiring. Some developed a fear of buses. Others couldn't stand to hear, row, row, row your boat. One little girl, her mother told me, would have panic attacks if you asked her to smile for a picture. They had spent 4 hours in a world where logic didn't apply, where safety was a lie, and where their only hope for survival was to sing and smile through their terror. You don't come back from that. Not really. You just learn to live with the ghost. I think that's why I keep the file. It reminds me that the universe doesn't always make sense. It reminds me that evil doesn't always have a motive. Sometimes, it's just a broken circuit in an otherwise ordinary-looking machine. Sometimes, it's just a quiet man who decides, for no reason at all, that it's time for everyone to start singing. And you'd be amazed how many people will sing, just hoping the bus will keep moving.